talk about, mister?
Did you not just go back to Gosney once again? Do the clap. Let's talk about what you've learned about me since you got out here. And then I'm going to tell you what I learned about you.
Oh, I'm excited, actually. Okay, cool. So when I first met Boston, a.k.a. Micah, I can bleep out your last name, was in RASP. RASP 1, 2016. Fall, to be exact. Fort Benning, Georgia.
Class 217.
Oh, was it actually? Damn, I don't remember that name. Or like the class name. That's just like something I didn't retain. But yeah, Micah was very serious. I mean, he joined RASP a little bit older, so it's mostly RASP is what do you have, 18-year-olds pretty much in it? That's the majority, 18 to 20-year-olds, so like younger guys. Like I was 22, had some college. Micah was 24. So a little more mature, a little more adult, I guess you could say. Very serious, blunt, straightforward. Overall, just kind of a dick. Is like a pretty good way to put it. So I was like, yeah, this guy's like really okay, just like acquaintance level. But we had mutual friends. Like I think a lot of our RAS class, at least from me, because we had a lot of dudes at Fort Benning, like I stayed really tight with them. So I was always aware of you. Like when I did TDY at the 275, like if I could hit you up, I'd hit you up or something. But nothing really like, I wouldn't say we were friends. I'd say acquaintances, So that was my first impression of you, but as we've, like obviously you want something from me, so who even knows if this is real? This is all a facade. But yeah, I mean, you seem like a very nice person. Like, I like you. You're cool.
Nailing it.
Yeah.
Now let me gas you up here real quick. Back to RASP. Let's see. I don't even...
I was a gray man as fuck.
You were a gray man as fuck.
Yeah. And so gray man, which, do you know what a gray man is? So a gray man is pretty much like you're extremely middle of the pack. No one knows who the fuck you are. Like you're pretty much a background character, which for me in selection, like that's what I wanted. I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I mean, like people, my peers and everything, absolutely. But like you don't want the cadre to really know. You don't want to stand out. Like you don't want to be someone getting picked on by the cadre, or I mean, if you're an overachiever, or it's not a bad thing to be an overachiever, but if you're like, I think how you stand on a RASP is being like a stud, like physically, and if you're like that person, then you get attention too, kind of more eyes on, maybe different expectations. But my goal was just to kind of like just pass it. Like I wasn't like, I need to be the honor grad of RASP 1. That was never a thought.
Yeah. Same. I mean, gray man was something I had been told about prior to going in, and like that was the target goal, is like don't be first but don't be last. So even though like you might want to be the standout guy, but think about some of the people from our class that were not, they stood out at the wrong times. You know what I mean? They might have put out on a run, but then that gave them notoriety with the cadre, and then they stood out on something else that they were weak on. And so gray man for me was definitely about, not that I couldn't have been the top performer even if I wanted to, you know what I mean? Especially on the physical stuff. Like physically, I was luckily in the middle of the pack up until I broke my leg, but still was able to keep with that, you know what I mean? And so middle of the pack gray man was a big deal. But yeah, through RASP, there's only a couple people I do remember like specifically, and you were one of them because you were kind of a part of like the little group that would hang out with a lot. But as far as like obstacles or things that were happening during it, I don't know if I could remember a single thing. Like it's funny that we were talking about doing the inchworm and the multi-man push-up, because I couldn't even told you anyone else that was there except for the exact dude you brought up.
Yeah.
And that was he's the only one I remember being there also, because he just stood out for a bunch of other reasons in a positive way. But it's funny that you brought that up, because I remember in my head just being one of the dicks that was like, quit to like the handful of dudes we, kind of talked about who are the ones that were bringing that whole event down. And then I do remember being the guy that was like, we got this, guys. Keep your head in the game.
Yeah, and so that event was in Coal Range, which when we went through, and like RASP 1 is an ever-changing course. 8 weeks, right? 8-week course. And so when we went through, Coal Range was week 2. So I think it's now like week 4 or something. They always change it around. But originally, like the first 2 weeks in RASP, especially, like for sure, phase 1 is when you're like getting rid of people, but especially week 1 and week 2. And so when we went through like that specific event, you're just running around with your rucks forever in the field, your perception of time and like reality is just crazy. You have like no idea what's going on, and everything's just sort of a blur, like very exhausted, tired. And at one point they were just having us run in circles forever. It wasn't even a circle, it was like a zigzag route through that the wood hit the wood line area. And eventually they started cutting people off. And so like the thing about selections is like you pick and choose when to sham, and I chose to sham at that time because I don't even remember what day it was in Cold Range. But that was the wrong time to pick to sham, because I was in the cutoff, you were in the cutoff, like all right, well, anyone who made it before this person, like you're in a separate group. It's like the blue chems versus the red chems, I think, right?
Yeah. Not chems, lenses.
Oh, lens. Yeah, on the L-shaped flashlight. And I think they got to take a break.
They did.
They got to bed down early, right?
The funny thing is that you say that you were shamming and you're implying that you were like slowing down, but like 75% of the dudes that made it to the cutoff and could take the break all turned around halfway.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. And by shamming, I probably wasn't even shamming. That's probably all I could do.
We're dying.
Yeah.
That's exactly what was happening. No, seriously, because we were doing laps back and forth to the wood line, and I was on my way following a group because I was always kind of behind a major group of people, and I watched like 8 dudes just at least 100 yards shy of the wood line, which is a big difference with that type of weight.
Oh, yeah.
Fatigue. They just turned around and went back because the cadre wasn't that far down, and there were so many people going back and forth that you could just blend into that. And I was so paranoid about getting caught and getting dropped for like integrity that like those type of opportunities I never took. Like there's always like we talked about, shamming is almost something that you have to learn how to do for the right reasons, but it's not to be a dirtbag. It's to learn how, when you need to conserve energy so that you can prolong a certain activity for the greater good. And so shamming itself has like bad connotation, but it's almost more of like learn how to bend the rules the right way without being an integrity violation. And so like that bothered me so much that people were turning around halfway. I mean, that's why I was a dick in RASP, because I was watching people cheat left and right.
Yeah.
And then they were making it through, and I'm like, I'm not only not willing to do that because I'm scared of getting dropped, I also don't want to be that guy. You know what I mean? And so it was like a bad distrust thing that was happening. And then those guys were also like, you dude, like they were almost making fun of the fact that we didn't make it back in time for the cutoff.
Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah. Because they're like, what are you, some sort of, I would normally say the P word right now, but what are you, some sort of weakling or something, right? Yeah. And you're like, yeah, you were cheating. What the?
Yeah. You know, if I remember, and we'll bleep his name out.
Dude, that guy's do you know how his career path went?
I heard he got put into one of the shops and then like turned into a total dick, like dirtbag basically, because he was like, oh, you guys want to fuck me? I'm a hero. And then just like total dirtbag, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think he came from a family with money, and
for sure
he was like a tall, handsome dude. You know what I mean? Like, I think he would be objectively handsome. And
I'm 6'2". So how tall was he?
Oh, if you're 6'2", homie was fucking 6'9", son. But yeah, and yeah, it's just people like that where it's interesting because it's like, originally we're going like, we'll get back to the Foster incident, but I think the most interesting thing about RASP was like within the first few weeks you have like, and this is what I tell like people, they'll DM me on Instagram and ask questions and everything, and the biggest thing is it's like you see dudes that you know are stronger than you, know they're faster than you. And in weeks 1 and 2, like they end up quitting. Mm-hmm. You'll see dudes that are slower, weaker, smaller, they stick around. But on the flip side, you see dudes that are smaller, weaker, they get dropped out. You see guys that are stronger than you, they're staying in. You know, so it literally like as long as you're able to meet the standard of whatever RASP requires now for your physical fitness, if you can meet that standard, like you can make the course. So then it's like, okay, yeah, it's definitely like physicality is important, and like the stronger your body is, then I think the more leeway your mind has as far as like endurance and durability and longevity. But at the end of the day, it is like a real mentality, like how bad do you want this? And that'll take you through pretty much anything.
Yeah, it's definitely a mental fitness over physical, you know, and I know that because I broke my leg at Coal Range. And so if I was able to keep my head in the game under that type of pain afterwards, getting a soft cast built on me by the medic that was going through with us literally every day, like duct tape wrapped around my leg to create a soft cast to just be able to survive stuff. You know what I mean? And it just got worse and worse and worse to the point where the last week I was like literally limping everywhere. And luckily built rapport with, Sergeant, and he kind of hooked it up and allowed it. But the mental toughness piece is obviously the side of it doesn't matter how physically strong you are. One of the pieces with mental toughness is how many mind games they play with you. They really force you to think that you failed stuff. That's why there's no known standard for land nav. And that's why I thought I had failed land nav, because I made an assumption that it was 15 out of 20 points was the minimum. And then we had like an issue with the first run where there was a group of people, and I was in that group where everyone got 3 of the points wrong, the entire group that had got given those specific cards. And they basically just said, you guys are going to have to deal with that. So that means you have to try harder. Obviously, they're a little more fair than that. But in your head, you're like, well, now I'm behind the curve of everyone. And so I had gotten to like whatever it was, the 3rd or 4th night of land nav during night land nav. And I got really lost because it's like, you're obviously at that point, you're like sleep deprived beyond anything. And so you're like borderline hallucinating out there, if not fully hallucinating. And I got really lost trying to find a very simple point. And like I spent way too long coming back to an intersection in the road and shooting myself back out into the woods, and I just could not find it. And I'd spent probably an hour. And so then I was like, okay, I'm really lost. And then I went to find my next one. And what I had realized is the intersection I thought I was going to was the wrong one. And then I got really lost because then I thought I know where I was coming from, found out I didn't. And I was like, oh man. So then I was like running in the night trying to find it. And I was like, literally started crying because I was like, there's no way I'm passing this. Because that night I came back with like 3 out of 5. And I was like, I don't even know if these 3 are correct, because I got so turned around out there that I could not confirm if the 3 that I found were actually the right ones. Because when I thought I knew where I was, I realized later on that I wasn't where I thought I was. So I'm like, well, what happened with the other ones? And when we got back from Coal Range, they made a formation. I don't know if you remember this. It was prior to the 12 miler. Because remember how it was like, you weren't going to know if you failed some of the events in Coal Range until you got back and then did the 12 miler. So that was like the mind game of saying, if you think you've failed, you might as well quit, because the beatings that are going to keep coming will have been in vain because you've already failed. And that's like the mental toughness piece, is going on even in the face of failure, which is probably one of the most important lessons that guys will end up accidentally overlooking in something like that, is realizing that that's what their job is to do. It's not just to physically fatigue you and exhaust you. Like, it doesn't take that long to get people sleep deprived. It doesn't take that long to put people to a point of physical exhaustion where there's no way you can do a perfect push-up. There's no way you can actually sprint to the wood line by the time hack that they give you. They're just doing it to prolong the mental wear down. And so it's like when we got back from Coal Range, they pulled a formation out that they said were people that had failed events at Coal Range. I got pulled into that. And then they stood us out there behind one of the company buildings for like 3 hours. And dudes just started quitting left and right, because they're like, hey, listen, you're going to be doing the 12 miler. We can't get through this entire group to let you know what the results were from Coal Range. And so the 12 miler is going to start in like 2 hours or something like that. And so they had to stay out there, and there was probably 40 of us or something that they pulled. And they pulled in a group of like 6 dudes right off the bat, or 10 dudes, something like that. They all came out crying. They had all gotten dropped. And then they pulled in another group of like 10, came out crying. They all got dropped. And so I'm standing there with like the other half of the group. And then all of a sudden, after that, those first 2 groups got pulled. We just stood there for an hour. And then like half those dudes just quit, because they're like, all right, get ready, start packing your rucks, but also stay in this area in case you get called in. And I was just like, dude, I knew it. I failed. Whatever. Like, I'm not going to quit. That was like the one promise I made, is like, I just won't quit. Doesn't mean I can pass it. I already knew like what my physical limitations were compared to like a lot of the dudes that we were up against. And went to pack the 12 miler or whatever. Like, some of this is probably out of order, but they came out at some point before we actually started, And they're like, what are you still standing here for? And they're like, waiting for the results. It's like me and like 5 dudes left or something. And they're like, go pack the 12 miler. You guys are good. And so it was like the game. Some of those dudes had actually failed events. And then some of the dudes, they literally set it up to just see, will you quit before the 12 miler starts? Because no one wanted to do that 12 miler after Coal Range.
Yeah. You know what? I think, so that you were probably in the group from Land Nav, right? Like, that's what you think?
I don't know what all the events were that they were pulling guys from. I would assume it was all land nav, but there was other stuff that had went on there.
It might have been land nav, because here's what you know how we're like, oh, like the land nav is like a mystical number. So like being in RHQ, like I actually went in the STB like file folders. It's not a mystical number. I'm not gonna say it on this. I'll tell you after. But there's actually like, so they were fucking with you. That's cool.
I know. And I think that's like the whole...
They were fucking with you. That's awesome.
That's the whole lesson.
I'm glad you were stressed out and like really worried.
Well, I mean, think about like, where does that show up again once we actually started doing our job? Well, a whole lot of stuff's going to happen where all of a sudden there's a whole lot of unknown, whether that's your own capability or, you know, once we got on deployment and dudes started getting killed, then it's like, man, you're just dealing with the unknown all of a sudden. And it's like, you can't have the option to quit anymore. And if you do, then the consequences are so severe. And so there's a whole purpose. I actually really respect like the process of selection when it comes to like the mental mind game. The only problem is we know that cadre doesn't always get selected the right way. And so some cadre ends up only pushing the physical stuff and they never do the right job on the mental stuff.
So I get strong ranger and smart ranger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where like our big brother units, you know, the big tier 1 type of stuff, it's a lot more mental. It's obviously physical, but the majority of it is mental evaluation to see where are these integrity points, where are the failure points. Because, you know, one thing I remember is day 1 of RASP when we just did 1,000 push-ups. And it's like, well, obviously no one there can actually do 1,000 push-ups. So all it was an opportunity to let the cadre swarm dudes. And it's like you would see everyone is struggling. At some point, everyone is at the exact same level of failure. And then they were just looking for who is openly showing it. Who's the dude that's like feeling sorry for himself? Who's the dude that's whatever? And then they would just get 3 or 4 cadre on him and just be like, this dude's going to make us all start over. And like they would just make the dude get so insecure that it's like, just quit. And then they would. Like, I don't know how many dudes quit from that single exercise alone on that first day, but probably like 40 or whatever, because we lost a ton of dudes just in the first couple of days over really nothing.
Right.
And I think part of the physical piece of selection is there is graded events and then there's ungraded events. And if it was a ratio that I had to take a guess at, it's like 25% of it's graded, 75% of it is you're going to fail. Everyone's going to fail. We're just looking for, are you going to quit? And can we get in your head during the process type of thing?
Yeah, because I remember too, like I think what I started to realize towards the end is I remember there was a lot of people who had like they failed an event and then they got counseled on it and they're like, hey, you should probably quit. But then if they stuck till the end, they still graduated. Mm-hmm. So it is. There is definitely like, what was it? Safety violations was the big one. Like that was like, but in phase 2, if you did have a safety violation at the range, like you're done.
Yeah.
But
that's also the standard just in regiment.
Yeah, I mean, and that one's very important. Like, what's more important? You like flagging somebody with live rounds, and not being aware of it, or you not doing so hot on like a borderline impossible run?
Yeah, and it's obviously physical. We both saw that from doing the job, whether it's like CONUS or OCONUS. Like the physical side is obviously you have to have it. Like without it, you're not going to be able to keep up, and I have always struggled with that, you know what I mean? And a lot of that only changed when I started pushing myself for things outside of the requirements there. And that's a lot of what I told you about with like the ultra marathon train up. That was something completely on my own that actually really showed me probably more about myself than any of the other physical stuff that was getting put on me once I actually made it to doing the job day to day. You know what I mean? It's like you'll have your chain of command will put physical events on you to remind you not to make mistakes, which I agree with that methodology, but they also will take it to a point where it's not teaching you anything. The lesson has been learned 20% through the exercise or the event or whatever it is. The other 80% is them just going overboard. And there's a time and a place for going overboard for sure, especially when it's like a serious situation, or if you're being lackadaisical, or if you show up like too cool for school, which was what signed me up for a lot of the stuff I dealt with when I first showed up there. Was I made it very clear, stupidly, how old I was, what experience I had prior to showing up there, and how I didn't give a fuck about young team leaders and their lack of skill. But guess what? The Army runs off of a different thing. Whatever you did prior is irrelevant. And that's also like a big humbling lesson that was important for me to end up learning, was like, your past accomplishments don't mean dick. And I've actually had to apply that now to my life. And I think that's what's been a big change for me, is not riding off of the coattails of my prior successes, because that's like on the simplest version, it's the dude with the Letterman jacket that he peaked in high school. He was the captain of the football team. And then 10, 15 years later, the best thing he can pull out to impress himself and people is the Letterman jacket. And it's like, well, I've seen that in my life a lot, because I've had a lot of successes, especially prior to the military, and then a lot of successes in the military, and now a lot of successes out of the military. But if I'm honest with anyone, all of those successes were paralleled by equal, if not more, failures. So whatever my success peak was, there was a valley of failure that was usually deeper. And it's like easy to hold those down and not share those pieces. And probably the biggest thing that I was learning through my time in the military was that those valleys couldn't be hidden anymore. And it's like honesty is forced upon you in an environment like Ranger Regiment, because the standard is black and white, kind of. And there's always somebody above you that's looking to expose your failure. And that's a good thing. It can be done wrong when somebody is doing it for the wrong reasons, but there is a purpose behind that level of transparency. And that's probably one of the best lessons that I took from there, was showcasing your failures. And I think that's what's allowed me, with what I do now for work, to stand out and to open up really honest conversations with people, both in business and in other private sector, is leading with honesty and forcing transparency into the situation, and not allowing prior successes or failures to really be accounted for at the present. You know what I mean? It's almost just like performance on demand, which is like a term that gets thrown around in the military. People disregard that. They think that that just means being mentally fit, or physically fit, but performance on demand means nothing matters past or future. It's only what can you perform in the present, including like, are you physically tired? Don't care. Are you emotionally tired? Don't care. When I need you, I need you. And like a big thing that's taught me now in life is knowing what my limits are, because I have pushed myself beyond my physical, emotional, and mental limits. And then when people needed me, because I offered myself to them beyond my capacity, I wasn't able to actually be there for them. And like, I started to learn that there, and then unfortunately still didn't learn it enough there. You know, it took having a lot of hard stuff happen with my family to actually see it more clearly. But even in the moment of that, I still didn't learn it. It was in the aftermath and reflection after kind of going through like the stages of grief, so to say. It's like you have to get angry. You have to come to a certain level of acceptance. Like all of those things will end up happening. And at some point, as long as honesty is what you bring yourself back to, then you're going to see something different. You know what I mean? And that's probably been the best thing that's been healthy for me, like mentally and physically, is learning where my limits are and just being honest. I'm not a hero. I want to be, I can aspire to be, but I'm not. And so the best thing I can do for people is be there to whatever is realistic to me. And that's kept me happier, because I think there's an underlying truth in yourself, whether you're being openly truthful, there's an underlying truth in yourself that knows that you can't. You saw it when we were working with those guys on Saturday. One of them just wasn't being honest about where he already knew he was at. And then once it was like opened up to the group, it's like, now look how you apply this to your marriage. Look how you apply this to work. And that's because that's how I had to learn it, is trying to be more than what I am. And that's a lot of people, especially that come from our community, is it's very easy to live on a pedestal for the rest of your life, false pedestal. and that's not just special operations, that's business successes, that's relational successes where there's always an underlying something, and honesty has probably been the healthiest thing for me in my life. So
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like, so you're like, okay, so this has taught me to be transparent, right? Because it's interesting because it's like, I feel like while you're in, like I don't know, like,
transparency is not encouraged.
yeah. Oh, so you don't know what the fuck you're doing?
Yeah.
That's like what the...
Guess where that's also born out of, though? Lack of transparency from that team leader, not willing to admit that they didn't train you the right way.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing that I learned after was if you're in charge of anything, a group of people, an individual, a relationship, if it fails, it's on you. So business and the military have terrible habits of managers and rank pushing blame down the chain of command when it should be pushed either into you or up. Like anyone below you in life, whether that's business or military, you cannot blame them for anything. It is your responsibility. If I'm in charge of you and I ask you to do something and you don't do it the right way, that's a reflection of me not training you how to do it the right way. It's a reflection of me not learning how to communicate with you the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, that was definitely, for me, like whenever my ranges, whenever they'd goof up or make a mistake, that was always the first question. What did I do wrong? Like, then you analyze it. Okay, did I explain it properly? Did they know how to do this task? Like, did I actually teach them how to do this? Like that, you kind of just go down the pipeline of, that's definitely like the right way is like always look up, or always blame up, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It's like if your soldiers are fucked up, oh, your NCOs, it's because he's probably a shitbag or something, right? Now, is that always the case? No. But
that's where it has to start.
A lot of the times, it normally seems to be the case.
Well, think about even if there is blame to be put down, that's still a reflection of failure of leadership at some point. So you take a ranger, he gets to whatever team and he can't perform. Well, that's not just a failure on him. That's a failure on the cadre that let him pass. It's a failure on, like, you have to keep backtracking it all the way through leadership because once again, somebody put him there that wasn't him.
It's a failure on your mother for birthing you. She should have contraceptive. Yeah.
It's an interesting lessons to learn, but it's something big in business that kind of reverse the pyramid. You become a manager and somehow you think that it's everyone's responsibility to work for you. It's not. It's your responsibility to work for them. It's your job to clear the path for people below you to be successful, not for them to clear the path for you to be successful, and that's just different mindset for leadership versus management. And the term leadership gets thrown around so casually, and people don't realize that the difference between a manager and a leader is years and years of personal work.
Yeah.
Reflection work. Like people think that technical skills give you the right to be in charge of anything. It doesn't. It gives you the right to be a go-to advisory, the right to be a consultant. It does not give you the right to manage or try to lead other human beings. And I've had to watch my own ego get smashed right in front of me dozens of times by giving myself way too much credit and then not having worked enough personally. And it's really easy to want to shift the blame outwards in those environments. And hell, at some point, again, if you bring it back to honesty, at some point I'll realize, well, I wasn't training hard enough. I wasn't developing myself enough. I wasn't being intellectually sound enough to manage a person that's smarter than me or to understand a system that I'm trying to teach a team how to do it better, but they're still better at the technical skill than me. And so it's like, there's a lot of blame that needs to go upwards. And one of like the simple principles I try to live by now is like the pyramid of leadership just needs to be inverted. And that's as simple as it is. Everything will push its way down. The leader's responsible for everything that's happening, but not from the top, but from the bottom. And so shit should roll downhill to the leader, not down to the people.
Right.
You know what I mean? And leaders will have a lot more motivation to work for the team when their failures negatively affect them and make them look bad, instead of the team's failures being, okay, cool, let me fire this person. Cool, let me throw this person under the bus. Like, especially in the soft community, it gets really easy to just, oh, this dude's a dirtbag, this guy's a dirtbag. In the business environment, it's really easy to just say, I'm going to fire you. Well, again, that's a reflection of leadership. Like, and the problem is when you get a bunch of managers together, they'll just decide to do that as a group. They'll sit there and bitch and complain about the team, and then they all get really comfortable firing a lot of people. And the next thing you know, it almost looks like they've changed it to be like a sign of strength. Oh, it's so hard for people to work for me. Somehow people think that that's a sign of strength. It should be, you should be, like, people should be coveting to work for you, not terrified to work for you. So when somebody joins a team, whether it's in business or in the military, and it's like, oh no, I'm going to that guy's squad. Oh no, I got put on this guy's project. All of a sudden you see, why does that person not want to work for you? Well, it's because they know you ain't working for them. And you shift that mindset and you create a team where from the get-go, you set your employees or your team up for success by going above and beyond.